I was gonna catch me a rabbit. Gonna catch me a rabbit. Well, shut my mouth. Rabbit tracks.
Listen, Mammy, there ain't no way to wash clothes. What you all need is rhythm.
What do you all mean, rhythm?
I'll show you what I mean. In Harlem, there's a little place where everyone goes to see the way a washerwoman washes her clothes.
If you like boogie woogie rhythm, she's gotta be. Let the boogie woogie washerwoman give you a treat. On every afternoon, that's when the sessions begin, and all the boys from all the bands come down and sit in. They sit around and knock each other out when they play, while the boogie woogie washerwoman washes all day. Run me up down.
Hello, this is Bobby Hesley, and welcome to my multi-part series on the topic of systemic racism. And this series is entitled, Does Systemic Racism Exist in America Today? Now, before we get into this video, please like and subscribe to my channel. It really helps me out. And be sure to slide your finger over and push the notification button so that you'll receive notifications every time I make a new video. Now, let's get into part one of this topic. What you just saw is the United States of America of yesteryear. This was a country that was built on slavery and racism. But is the United States of America of today, the one that we live in the year 2020, a racist country ruled by white supremacy? Well, in order to gauge the present and the future, we need to look back at the past. Here's a quote from Alexander H. Stephens, who was the Vice President of the Confederate States of America, explaining why he seceded from the Union. He says, and I quote, "Our new government is founded exactly upon the opposite idea. Its foundations are laid and its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race, is his natural and normal condition." Did you know that at one point in time in America, all the way until the year 1908, that the United States federal government under the United States Postal Service used to sell lynching postcards? Your eyes are not playing tricks on you. These are postcards of dead black men, often young black teenage boys who were falsely accused by whites of many different crimes that they didn't commit. Or even if they did commit crimes, they were petty crimes like shoplifting or things like that, that nothing would merit being hung from a tree like this. But look at these lynching postcard, folks. You could see the stationery of dead black men hanging. You could see people writing letters on the back of these lynching postcards. And these cards were distributed, kept, collected, and used as souvenirs. They've even been referred to by Amy Louise Wood in her 2005 essay, Lynching Photography and Bigotry Reproduction of White Supremacy. She referred to them as, quote, bigot pornography. Think about this, folks. Not even the Nazis stooped as low as publishing and selling photography of Auschwitz or other concentration camps. Yet here we have the United States federal government, the United States Postal Service, selling postcards of black men who were killed in barbaric acts of racial hatred. And if that's not enough, you saw the cartoons that this video opened with. Look at some of these other still photos that are taken from the Jim Crow Museum of Ferris State University. I mean, you can see cartoons of black people, degrading depictions of us black people. This was known as the Pickaninny era. You have these black Pickaninny depictions of how white people viewed us blacks and how they depicted us in their art. It's terrible. But oftentimes in this day and age, in the year 2020 and beyond, we always hear this phrase called systemic racism. Well, based on the opening of this video, there's no doubt that systemic racism existed in the United States. And I would even go so far as to say that there's no doubt that the United States was built on systemic racism. But this is a phrase that we hear so much that we often wonder if we even know what it means. In fact, I would say that a high percentage of people that use this phrase systemic racism have never actually done the research and taken the time to actually look up what it means. So allow me to define quickly, what is systemic racism? Well, if you go to dictionary.com, here's what the definition is. Systemic means relating to a system, especially as opposed to a particular part. The disease is localized rather than systemic. So basically what the word systemic means is a centralized distribution from the whole of an entire system to one small part of it. So think of cancer. You know, the entire body metastasizes, but there's one particular part of the body that the cancer is distributed to, that where it concentrates. For example, I lost my dad to stomach cancer back in 1996. And when it metastasized, it began in his stomach. It began from a local focal point, but then it spread throughout his entire body and it took his life. So that's an example of what systemic is. Something that spreads system-wide, but it's focused on a small part of that entire system. So in the case of systemic racism, we can say that there was systemic racism that came from, the entire system of the United States government and economy and culture, and the primary and sole victims of that were the African American black race. So I definitely agree with our brothers and sisters on the left that the United States at one point in time was a country that suffered from systemic racism. And I still do believe that there is systemic racism in the United States, but it's not the systemic racism described by liberals on the left. You'll have to tune into my next video to truly understand what I, Bobby Hesley, believe to be the systemic racism that oppresses black people in the United States. And make no mistake about it, folks, I do believe that black people suffer oppression in the form of systemic racism, but it is not the systemic racism that you think. I can assure you that it's a type of racism that you never hear about, but it's the deadliest, most oppressive form of racism that we black people suffer. And again, you'll have to tune into my next video to understand exactly what I mean. But I'll give you a clue. This systemic racism is nothing at all like you hear peddled by the mainstream media and by the Democrat Party. As a matter of fact, this systemic racism was actually created and continues to be peddled by the mainstream media and the Democrat Party, which, in this day and age, there really isn't much of a difference between the two. And again, you'll have to tune into my next video to know exactly what I mean. But in closing, I want to close with a few video clips to demonstrate my point that I don't believe that you can get away with the racism today, nowadays, that people randomly got away with during times past. I mean, think about it. Think of all the national outrage over the death of George Floyd. Think of all the national outrage whenever there's even a perception of racism. Well, I opened this video with lynching postcards. Racism was so embedded into our culture that people literally made postcards about hanging black people. That's how desensitized that people had become, to the point where they celebrated and sold and distributed lynching postcards. But nowadays, people who actually commit racism, whether they say the N-word or even if they're perceived to be slightly racist, those people are lynched. They're lynched economically, they're lynched professionally, their careers are absolutely destroyed. And the fact is, in this day and age, you cannot get away with the kind of racism that people used to get away with in the past. As a matter of fact, I argue that you can't get away with any racism without your life being destroyed. I mean, think about what happened to the career of Don Imus. Do you remember what happened to Don Imus? Do you remember what he said about a black women's basketball team? If you don't remember, here's the clip.
Girls from Rutgers, man, they got tattoos and
some hardcore hoes.
That's some nappy-headed hoes there, I'm going to tell you that now.
Oh, man.
Man, that's some... Ooh. And the girls from Tennessee, they all look cute, you know, so like kind of like a, I don't know.
Spike Lee thing.
Yeah.
The Jigaboos versus the Wannabes.
Yeah,
that movie that he had.
Yeah, it was a tough.
Do the right thing.
I don't know if I'd have wanted to beat Rutgers or not, but they did, right? On Friday, I apologized for some remarks that I made and others made, but particularly ones that I made on this program to the women's basketball team at Rutgers University. And it was a straightforward apology that Charles and I wrote, and I didn't I didn't think it was necessary to offer any excuse. No, I don't think there is now. I didn't think there was any need for me to put into any sort of context what happens on this program, because I unwisely just assumed that everybody knows, and obviously they don't. And I didn't think it was important to talk about what I do with my life, what my wife does with her life, and who I am, because I thought it was important that I apologize to these young women and to that coach and to their parents and to you for.
Here's another career that was ruined by perceived racism. Do you remember what happened to the career of Paula Deen, one of the most powerful, wealthy female cooks? She had her own cooking show, made millions of dollars, had all kinds of sponsors lining up to align themselves with her. And look at what happened to her career. Do you remember the legendary Hulkster brother, Hulk Hogan? The biggest, perhaps one of the biggest superstars of the 1980s in the wrestling world. And even in the mainstream world, he was in Rocky III. Well, look at what happened to his career. He was caught on a very bad tape using the N-word. Or what about Dog the Bounty Hunter? Do you remember what happened to his career? So you cannot even get away with saying the N-word. If you want to commit career suicide, if you want to commit financial and professional and reputation suicide, all you have to do is pronounce that unspeakable word that people equate with blaspheming the name of God, and that's the dreaded N-word. You say that N-word and your career is over. But what if I told you that there are still white people today who can get away saying the N-word, that there are still white people today who are blatantly and openly racist and are celebrated and are given a pass and are even given more power in spite of the fact that they are openly racist? I'm going to give you some examples and some video clips ahead here. But the only people who can, there is a segment of our society, there is a privileged class of people who actually are able to get away with racism, with blatant racism. And those are people who are in the Democrat Party, people who are liberals on the left. They can be openly racist. Not only will they be given a pass on their open, blatant, in-your-face racism, but they actually acquire power and votes and money and influence in spite of their racism, and I would argue because of their racism, because they are voted for and fueled by people who are very hostile towards blacks. And I'm going to get into that in my coming videos, because this is a multiple part series called Does Systemic Racism Exist? So thank you for watching part 1, and here are some closing examples of people who get away with blatant racism and acquire power in spite of it. You absolutely have to see it for yourself in order to believe it. Prepare to be blown away.
Today, our country has lost a true American original, my friend and mentor, Robert C. Byrd. Senator Byrd was a man of surpassing eloquence and nobility.
There are white niggers. I've seen a lot of white niggers in my time. I'm going to use that word.
Years from now, when I think of the man we memorialize today, I'll remember him as he was when I came to know him. His white hair full, like a mane, his gait steadied with a cane, determined to make the most of every last breath.
You know, that's childish.
What do you think of Cory Booker's, and you didn't comment on him, and you feel free
to.
I
adore him.
What do you think about him saying kick them in the shins, essentially? Start to get to that kind of political.
Well, that was Eric Holder.
Yeah, Eric Holder,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know they all look alike.
No, they don't. Oh, well done. You know, Hillary.
Yeah, I was paid by Mark Zuckerberg to do that.
Okay.
Trump is a lightning rod, even when he's not there. Look what happened on The View today with guest co-host Kelly Osbourne.
There are a lot of Latinos here in this country that do agree that the immigration problem is a problem and it does need to be addressed and it does need to be fixed.
Interesting.
But making those comments, those racist comments, do not help.
And if you kick every Latino out of this country, then who is going to be cleaning your toilet, Donald Trump?
Oh, that's no.
In the sense that, you know what I mean? Like, but I'm saying
there's more jobs to be
in LA, they always,
but
they
Latinos are not only the only people
I didn't mean it like that. Come on.
Listen, you got to come see us when you come to New York, VP Biden.
I will.
It's a long way until November. We got more questions.
You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black.
It don't have nothing to do with Trump. It has to do with the fact I want something for my community. I would love to see
Take a look at my record, man. I extended the voting rights 25 years. I have a record that is second to none. The NAACP has endorsed me every time I've run. Come on. Take a look at the record.
The fact that Hillary Clinton even stood a chance as a Democrat candidate, in spite of that terrible racist thing she said and other things that her and her husband said, is an absolute disgrace. The fact that Joe Biden is still the leader of the Democrat Party for the 2020 Democrat nomination ticket to run against President Donald Trump is an absolute disgrace. Could you imagine if a Republican said that if you support my opposition, you ain't black? His career would be over. He would be sued, and his political career would be absolutely over, and he would drop out of the race in shame with his tail tucked between his legs. But not Joe Biden, because he's got that big fat D in front of his name. He can get away with any kind of racism he wants to. And that's an absolute disgrace. Senator Robert Byrd, who was a grand wizard of the KKK, was eulogized by the sitting president, the first black president we ever had, Barack Obama. And this man was a grand wizard in the KKK. He used the N-word, as you heard in that clip. And yet he gets a hero's send-off at his funeral by our first black president. What an absolute disgrace. But that's the country that we live in, folks. We still have systemic racism in this country, but it is peddled and committed by the very people who seem to be the loudest voices against it. And we're going to get into that in my next video. So I want to thank you for tuning in to my channel. This is Bobby Hesley signing off. Please like, subscribe, and share this video. It'll really help my channel grow. I thank you for your viewership and your patronage, and I look forward to seeing you in part 2 of Does Systemic Racism Still Exist in America? I'll see you then, folks. God bless.